Broadcasting to the world, this is On Call with Chad McCall. In our show, we bring you inspiration, strategies, and insights on how to start, grow, and scale your business.
It's drastically changed my life.
The show is so informative. I just love it. It's honest. It's helped me grow as a person.
Real talk about life, lifestyle, society, and living limitless. Learning from the top influencers across the world, along with industry experts, authorities for you to live your greatest life. It's time to level up.
I'm ready.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Here's your host, best-selling author and mentor, Chad McCall.
Welcome, welcome. I truly appreciate the time you are spending with me in each episode. Every week, I strive to bring value to your life and your business. Today, you're in for something I consider one of those valuable calls that you're going to have to take notes. I know it's going to have lessons for you, your life, and your business. Business owners, you better pay close attention. The world has changed in so many ways in the last decade, and there are more changes happening, especially here in 2020. There is a new normal. Okay. Today's call is with Dr. Steve Yacovelli. He spent the last 25 years studying businesses and their leadership. And the reason this call is so important for every business owner, CEO, and entrepreneur out there, you need to know how to handle your business, your culture, and how it's done through the proper leadership. Dr. Steve is going to shed light on becoming a leader, how to be a better leader, and how to find great leaders for your team. So hang tight while I get Dr. Steve Yacovelli on the phone. Siri, will you give Dr. Steve Yacovelli a call?
Of course, I would love to call Dr. Steve Yacovelli.
Hello?
Steve.
Hey, how are you, Chad?
I'm doing great. How are you this morning?
I am doing swell, all things considered. I'm here in Central Florida, and it's a beautiful day physically, and we're just trying to do our best like everyone else across the world.
I know. Isn't it crazy how everything has just changed? I mean, this goes one way, then the other day it's a 180. The world in 2020 has really been nuts.
Whoever opened the 2020 Jumanji game set needs to shut that thing right now.
Oh, yeah. 2020 is 1, everybody else 0.
Exactly.
So, Dr. Steve, I wish I could have done this call a couple weeks ago. Spending the last 20 plus odd years in building leadership, talking about change management and culture change and corporate training and so many big businesses. The big business world, they're changing over the last several years in a lot of ways, but especially now here in 2020. But what makes this so special, I wanted to talk to you about what you're seeing, like what's going on out there when it comes to leadership and brands and things that people are having the most struggle with right now.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if you look, kind of take that step back and you look at some of the both big and small businesses, the challenge is in these very unprecedented times, either maintaining or pivoting in the business culture and being inclusive and engaging folks, whatever that looks like, whether that be people working remotely, people on those front lines, and how we kind of keep their energy moving. And so it's just this weird, awesome opportunity for businesses to really think about the type of culture that they have and the type of culture that they want, and even given some of the technology and things that are happening in this world. And I think it's actually kind of exciting. I'm a glass half full kind of guy anyway, so I'm looking at this as a really cool pivot opportunity for businesses and organizations to really rethink about how they're engaging with those around them.
There's been a change in something that you are really passionate about, and I wanted you to kind of introduce my listeners to your world. Like, you have a great book. It's called Pride Leadership. My listeners, and you're going to have to educate me here, Dr. Steve. Tell me a little bit about how this book came about, Pride Leadership, and the, breaking into the LGBTQ community and being a leader. Tell me a little bit give me the backstory of this. I need to learn.
Yeah. So I've been in the leadership space in some way or shape or form for about 25-ish years. And I've been an internal consultant, external consultant. I was internal with the Walt Disney Company. I was an external consultant with IBM, and then with some other really, really fun organizations, and then started my own learning and leadership practice called Top Dog Learning Group in 2008, which which was an awesome time to start a business, by the way. It's really, really actually quite challenging time, but we learned a lot. And so, I've been in this space, and you kind of, as you go forward and do, you used to do face-to-face workshops and even online things, and you start to see a pattern of behavior with leaders, and the ones who are just crushing it, doing awesome work, you see how they behave in certain characteristics that they have. And then the ones that are in my leadership workshops that are just crashing and burning, you also see what they have, or more importantly, what they don't have. And so kind of the nerd in me was just tucking that data away. And then a couple years ago, I was at a conference, actually, the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. And I'm one of about 1,000 companies within the US and growing that are certified LGBTQ owned businesses. So you have a lot of different minorities who get certified. National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce is the one that does that. So I'm at their conference. It's my first time there. And I'm kind of sorting business cards, and this woman's next to me kind of doing the same thing. And we just struck up a conversation, and she's like, "What do you do?" And I basically gave her the spiel I just shared. I said, "How about you?" She's like, "I'm a publisher." I said, "You know what? I got a book in my head that needs to come out." She's like, "Let's have a chat." So flash forward, June of 2019 is when Pride Leadership Strategies for the LGBTQ leader to be the king or queen of their jungle kind of premiered, or came out, as I like to say, since it's a gay leadership book. And it's been a really fascinating experience. And how I got to a quote unquote gay leadership book, well, as I started to write the book, and I was doing a lot of work and continue to do a lot of work on advocacy within the LGBTQ community. I mean, and quite frankly, for the listeners out there, if you don't know, Dr. Steve Yacovelli, also known as the Gay Leadership Dude. So 3 things about me. I'm gay. I focus on leadership, and I self-identify as a dude. So with all that being said, I'm about to write this generic leadership book. And I'm watching all these, and I'll use the general term queer leaders, which kind of encompasses our whole community. And I'm seeing people who are doing things as queer leaders who are just really rocking and rolling. And I'm thinking about the stuff that I've seen in the past on what makes people really effective. And then if you remember Sex in the City, Chad,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
I think my wife watches the reruns.
Yeah, it's like always on TBS, it seems. So Carrie Bradshaw, the main character, is always sitting at her keyboard, and she always goes, "I couldn't help but wonder," and that's like her hypothesis. And I honestly said, I can't help but wonder, does the opportunity of being a member of the LGBTQ community give you an opportunity to flex some leadership muscles and skills that our straight brothers and sisters also have that opportunity, but maybe in a different way? And so in my book, that's kind of the hypothesis. And so I look at it through the lens of, how do you look at the top 6 leadership competencies that I've seen really work well for people out in the workforce.
And so you talk about the top leadership competencies, and that was authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture, right?
Very good. Yes. Woohoo!
I've done a little bit of research, of course. Yeah, I want to make sure. I mean, this is so important, Steve, what you're talking about. I really want to learn this. Like, my wife knows a lot about the LGBTQ community and the communication, and I'm a beginner.
How I got to these 6 competencies. And so when I take a step back and look at it through the lens of any leader, authenticity, courage, empathy, communications, relationships, and culture are rock star stuff for any leader, period. And when I first wrote the book, and I was getting the very first piece of feedback from Heather, the editor, which is my first editor, which I just love. Her name is Heather, the editor. And she, we had the call, and I'm like nervous like a kid at the principal's office. And she's like, "Okay, Steve, here's your feedback." I'm like, "Okay, bring it on." She's like, "I'm not your target audience. I'm a white, cisgendered, straight woman." I'm like, "And?" She's like, "This is the book I wanted for my MBA program." I'm like, "What?" And so she said, it's very solid in research, because if you look at, say, the awesome Brene Browns of the world and some of the other leadership gurus out there, they're already having conversations about some of these 6 competencies, or many of them. So that's not new. And I'm not going to claim that I'm just like rocket scientist, awesome stuff. However, what I have done is made a book that's insanely approachable and filled with awesome bad dad jokes and queer gay references. Like, there's a, one of the things in the end of the chapter is about applying this and looking for mentorship is either you find your own RuPaul. And if you're not familiar with that, if you're listening, RuPaul does this whole drag race thing, which frankly, I've actually only seen like once. The way that RuPaul approaches the contestants is very nurturing and developmental. And so that's kind of the approach, and it's cheeky and it's fun. And so if you are a business owner, thinking through the lens of these six is really a great way to think about where does a qualified candidate, regardless of other demographics, their authenticity as a person or their level of empathy that they have maybe for those around them in the workplace, including clients and customers. And so using this even as a starting point is a great way to start to think about the awesomeness of the candidates that you want to bring to your team or your current team members as well.
And just from reading and learning some more about this, you were talking about how individuals that have been through growing up through the LGBTQ community have been through certain things mentally, emotionally, and so they're already kind of, I guess, like trained in a way, like their mind is more. How do you explain it? Give me a better way of what you were talking about that, because they're open to, they've been through more struggles, so they're bringing the workforce. They're a step ahead sometimes.
Yeah, and that's a great way to say it, Chad. So, for example, let's talk about authenticity. If you look at the contemporary research out there on leadership, there's a lot of chatter about how being an authentic leader is good for business and it's good for your leadership skills. Why? Because if you're authentic, people trust you. And if I could boil down my 356-page book into one page with one word on it, it would be leadership success is trust. If people trust you, you're golden. You're well on your way to be successful. So going back to authenticity. So the general conversation out there is, yep, if you are authentic, you build trust with those around you. Score. So then now put it through the lens of a member of the LGBTQ community. So if I'm at the workplace and I'm actually an out person, how much more authentic can I be? Because you often hear that the LGBTQ community is an invisible minority because we choose to share our authentic selves with those around us. For many of us, it's just not like blatantly obvious, or we're not like flashing out with our rainbows and glitter and unicorns everywhere. We're just members of the community, and so you have this conversation a lot to be, I'm going to be authentic at work. I'm going to put the picture of my husband of 22 years on my desk, or I'm going to share with my coworkers what I did this past weekend and not have to dance around pronouns on who I hung out with. And those are the types of things that as a straight person, you don't have to think about. You just are who you are. Where in our community, we have to think about who we want to share and let into our authenticity. And that's just kind of one example that also then flows into the conversation of courage. So I argue in my book that even though I talk about 6 competencies, they're so gorgeously intertwined, you can't separate them. If I'm an out person at work, or I'm a trans person being my authentic self in the world, including the workplace, that takes courage. And if you channel that courageousness that you have into being more awesome as a leader, boy, you just are light years ahead of those who have to find the opportunities to be courageous in that workplace experience.
How do I gain the confidence of, let's say, employees or team members or businesses that I'm working with, another business, help create a culture or a concept, an idea, like you said, that world where I'm more open to letting them know they can be more open with me. Like, don't hold back. How do I create a culture for, if I do have members that aren't coming out to me and the people, how do I break down that barrier to let them know it's okay?
That's an awesome question, Chad. So one of the things I start in the book before I even get into the 6 competencies is a concept that I call being a consciously inclusive leader. And that's really for everybody. It's actually one of the basis of one of the keynotes and virtual keynotes that I've been doing for quite a while. And it's the whole concept, and your listeners might know this, it's managing unconscious bias. But I don't like to use that phrasing because years ago when I first started teaching unconscious bias, it was actually when I was at Disney. And I remember doing a workshop that had that conversation in it. And there's a gentleman in the back of the room, and he just and you could just see the body language. He was so voluntold to be in this session. Like, he didn't want to be there at all. And he just kind of folded his hands in the back, and we're having this conversation on conscious bias. I can see him being really like kindergarten kid in a dress up suit, how they like tug at everything and are really awkward and uncomfortable. And so that's the nonverbals he said to me. So finally, he breaks up and he's like, well, Steve, if it's unconscious bias, it's unconscious. I can't do nothing about it. And he just, kind of shut down. And ever since then, I'm like, you know what, I get what he's saying, but that's actually not true. If you look at studies, I mean, we as humans can de-bias ourselves, and there's some cool ways to do it. So I use the concept of being a consciously inclusive leader. And I think, again, that applies to everyone. As a leader, as someone who's creating an organizational culture, it's our opportunity to be consciously inclusive of all the quote unquote others in our space. And that could be people of color, that could be all genders, that could be LGBTQ plus folks, doesn't matter. It's really smart leaders, and quite frankly, really smart business people are looking at being inclusive as not only just the right thing to do, and in some cases it's what we have to do legally, but most importantly, it really does fall into good business sense to be as inclusive as possible. Because why exclude a market share or an opportunity to recruit from certain demographics or populations and exclude them? Now you're excluding some awesome talent. You're excluding some awesome loyal customers. So being consciously inclusive is a stupidly simple but smart strategy, really, for any leader to do within their own business.
It's almost like it's got to flow from the top, or is it through hiring and being more open about the hiring process? Because, like you said, things are changed. It's more of the world has changed. The last decade has been so different for the movement. Now it's a lot more acceptable than where it used to be, and in certain areas of the country, it's it's gaining momentum, and people are becoming more. I guess they're having more conversations about the community. So workforces and teams and businesses are becoming more I guess integrated, but it's still not front and center mainstream where you're out there saying this is the type of culture I created this specifically. You're not known as that culture. You're known as just a business that hires people from all types of genre, demographics. So is it hiring people that start to get into the organization? Is it hiring management, putting people in management, leading, having those conversations? Because companies that are large are going to bring in you, for example, and you have a conversation to the masses. But then what if you're talking and there's no real people in the LGBT community working there? You know what I mean? So
Yeah. Yeah, and so whenever Top Dog Learning Group, people are like, oh, you do training. It's like, yeah, but so one of the things that I've done in the past, actually this was my job when I was at IBM, was a change management consultant. And I actually approach any organizational behavior change as a change management project. So if you look at, there's a company called ProSci, Professional Science, it used to be called. I'm certified with their process. There's like a ton of different change management processes, and then all of them really have their own value. But there's a common thread between all of them, and that's you don't do when I worked at Disney Cruise Line, which is where I worked at Disney, I would sometimes run on board the ships and like do a training class, and then I'd run away and go back to my shoreside office, my cubicle. And I used to affectionately call that a ship dip. I go in, do my training, dip the crew in whatever topic of the month I was doing, and then run away. And that's only effective if you have a support system that reinforces the message that you have. So when clients bring me on for a virtual keynote, or I was always very adamant to say, look, if you're just expecting me to be a silver bullet to change your culture, I'm out, because that's malpractice to me. You or me, doesn't matter, but somebody has to maintain the mantle of looking at the communication strategy for this story, having that executive support it, and not just support it like signing a check, but be actively supporting it out to the masses, to the workforce. What are you measuring the success of the program for? How do you know if this is going to work? Just because you have Steve come out and do like a quote unquote butts in seats, wow, we had 500 people watch his keynote. Well, so what? How are you going to make that part of your business? Like, those are some of the pieces for any change management strategy that has to be there. And that's where I tell folks that, a silver bullet of a one-day training is not going to change. I have a lot of clients coming up to me and asking for our team to do either unconscious bias training or anti-racism training now, which is, hey, glad they're thinking about that. That's fantastic. But I have the conversation. You're not going to change your organizational behavior with a one-day workshop or a 1-hour keynote or whatever's the Zoom equivalent of stuff. And so that's where I think the conversation really has to happen. We can start that conversation, but if the business truly isn't behind it and it's more of a PR tick box, change isn't going to happen in the workplace.
I'm wanting to say things like, I wish that it would be more open in certain organizations. Like I'll tell you, like in my world of real estate, I have the most amazing interior designers that are gay.
Not promoting a stereotype though.
Like me being uneducated about this, when I say, hey, you know what, if I'm saying I need to have a gay interior designer, am I saying that the right way? Is that a good, because again, that's the demographic that, in that market I understood. But again, I want to know that my vernacular is correct. And I think too, in business owners, we sometimes can be scared of how we say certain things, that we worry about saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, making
Mhm.
the wrong comment or something too. And I think there's where we walk on eggshells sometimes. And I do. I mean, I'm terrified. I mean, I grew up in Western North Carolina. I probably say the wrong thing all the time. Thank God I got my wife to correct me, every second of the day. But I want to make sure I don't say or do the wrong thing. And I think that's something, is how can we learn to get more educated about not what you say and what not to do?
No, and I appreciate that, Chad. And I think a couple things. We want to be mindful of, and in my book I talk a lot about mindfulness, mindful meditation, and things of that nature too. It's not just a granola crunchy kumbaya kind of stuff. You see the best CEOs playing in mindful meditation and what that looks like from an understanding your own personal behavior and actions and words kind of thing. So I think we as leaders can practice being a little bit more mindful of why we're thinking the things that we think. For example, it's pretty easy for us to perpetuate stereotypes like, oh, I have to have a gay hairdresser, or a gay, interior designer, or, like those types of things. Sure, there's some great gay, lesbian real estate folks out there, designers, all that good stuff, but there's just as many straight ones out there too. So, what are the things that we can do to open ourselves out to maybe not go down those same things? I use an example in my training stuff when I have my team, and I call my team top doggers. Like whenever they're creating learning, and we're really big about visuals, and our PowerPoints are like slideshows. They're pretty, they look great, but we're incredibly mindful to not perpetuate particular stereotypes in the images we select. So whenever we're, say, talking about a senior leader at a business, if I ask your listeners right now to write down 5 descriptors of the image that just popped in their mind about a senior leader in business, I would bet dollars to donuts that they're going to say something like white, middle-aged dude would be 3 of the 5. And because those are the stereotypes that we all have. So we have an opportunity to go against those. And so I think that as we think about trying to be more open and more inclusive, to watch ourselves to not fall into that kind of that stereotypical kind of going down the path. But with that being said, I think there's a really cool opportunity for anyone, as you find those folks within who are part of the community that you're trying to understand, have that open and frank conversation and say, you know what? You said it gorgeously a couple minutes ago, Chad. I don't know. I don't want to say the wrong things. Help me understand. And, people know, any demographic, any person knows that honesty, that you're not trying to, say the wrong thing but tread lightly in eggshells, but you want to know. And you start to have that trust. There's that T word again. You start to have that trust with those folks, and they're going to correct you. I know for me personally, just several years ago, I started to try to really be a better ally to the trans community. Yes, they're part of the LGBTQ+, but I at the time I didn't have a whole lot of transgender friends, and I'm like, I need to understand, because I can be a voice for them, both within my community as well as out. And so, I just found those trusted folks, and I said something very similar to what you said. I want to know more. What else can I do? And they also pointed me toward resources to do, some books to read, and then it was always, but come to me, Steve, if you have a question. I'm like, absolutely, of course. And that's what allyship is all about. It's when you're not part of the group, but you want to defend them, and make sure that they're treated as equally as everyone else, then you have a great opportunity to just educate yourself, find those trusted folks to be that shepherd through the community, and just open yourself to grow and learn. And that's the best thing we can do.
Sorry for all my silly questions, but you
are
educating me. You are and you're educating listeners too.
No, it's great.
So you mentioned something there that I wanted to take away. I had my first experience I would say probably in my whole life. It was probably about a year ago or so. My wife and I, we have our first friend that I met that's, is trans. I was thinking, for my own stereotypes, that it's that's something you're going to see in LA. Again, I'm from a small town, North Carolina originally. I'm thinking like New York, it's LA. Like it's not, it hasn't been in my world, but it's more, it's more common than I thought. It's like once you start to open your mind, more things come. And I think that's what more people need to do is, as a leader, as an influencer, keep that mind open, because things start to flow through your mind. And when we had this, I have this friend now that, it's a great friend to me and my family, that they ran into a situation, Steve, and I thought this would be perfect to ask you about, where they transitioned from one career to the next career, okay, based off of sheer qualifications and everything else. And then in the workforce at this new company, the individual was in a situation where someone in management said, you're going to make people feel uncomfortable. And
Interesting.
this just recently happened. And we're not as open as I thought we were. Like, I thought we were making better headway. This is just a recent occurrence. And so the person hearing that now, from all of the things that you'd mentioned and talked about, that they became a leader, they've moved up. That's why they go on for better careers and advancing, by being strong and coming out and talking about things and being more open. And is, what do you do? What do you say? How do you help someone or help a business that, that's their culture?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and I actually in the book I talk about the last chapter on last competency chapter on shaping culture, and it's really about understanding where the organization and organizational culture is in a couple different ways. So most organizations, and for the listeners out there, even if you're an entrepreneur, if you don't have a vision, mission, and organizational values, do that this week or do that sometime soon. Because what you're doing is you're laying foundation for when you grow, you're creating that standard way of operating, especially with those organizational values. And so when you look at the values of a business, we'll just use business for now. This is the social contract that people come into. It's how you do the daily work. And you typically see, mid to big size organizations have some sort of, we want to strive to be equitable for all, or some sort of inclusive value that's being stated. So there's that. So that's the first thing. Like, is actually out there on the website and part of the organization? Then you look at how the organization really operates. I've been around the block enough that I've worked with organizations that say we honor work-life balance, but then they're like, oh, you work 70 hours a week. They're leaders, and that's a bit of a disconnect in the values versus what's on. So as a smart leader, we want to be mindful of, are the values that are stated, are they real? So that data point right there is an opportunity for alignment or disconnect. And so you have that there. So let's say, like, no, overall, for the most part as a business, we are inclusive. Great. So that when you have these situations like the one you just described, where it's like, oh, you're making people uncomfortable, the opportunity for that leader who said that is, no, our values are about being inclusive. That's not a fair place for you to go. You're the one who's making me uncomfortable because you're going against our agreed upon organizational values. And so you turn it from that perspective, because it's assumed that those values are the ones that all senior leadership abide by and support. So, if you're saying you're inclusive, you can't say I'm inclusive with a big asterisk on it, that, well, but not for inclusive for everybody. That's not how that works. And I think you start with the business values, the organization's values, and then that applies to any demographic that you're playing around with. And it's either that or this. And those are the conversations that I personally have with clients and with leaders within my client base when they're having those, well, I don't feel comfortable with a trans person. Well, you know what? You're supposed to be inclusive. Let's get you comfortable because that's the expectation. Or maybe this isn't the right cultural fit for you, even though you've been here for however many years.
And you just said that. It made me think of, you can't be comfortable with the L and the G and leave out the rest. If that's, I don't know if that's proper to say, but you know what I mean? It is
absolutely proper.
You can't pick and choose of what you're comfortable with. They're comfortable with parts of the LGBTQ plus. You know what I mean? They're not with the whole part, everything yet.
There's some really fascinating studies looking with the trans community and specifically on performance and how they're treated in the workplace. And I won't go into too much details, but there's one that looked at these two Stanford professors, both in the I believe the psychology department. And one transitioned from female to male later in their career, and then one transitioned from male to female also later, and both were like about like in late 40s, early 50s kind of thing, and the one researcher, Joan Rogarden, she you know pre-transition, he did a lot of writing, was very controversial but very well respected, was chair of the department, all these good things. Transitioned in the workplace, and saw opportunities kind of start to erode and go away, and wasn't being published as much. And then the other scientist, Dr. Ben Barris, who's unfortunately since passed, transitioned from female to male, wrote all these papers, mixed reviews, and then transitioned to male, and had just like all of a sudden, as he says in the book, this one book I read, but said, I felt like I got the keys to the kingdom just because now I'm my authentic self. I'm a male. And it was, even tells this anecdote where he's presenting at a conference, and just controversial paper, blah, blah, blah ideas. And at the end, this guy in the audience stands up and is like, oh my gosh, Dr. Barris, you are so much smarter than your sister. And it's just like, that's the same person. That's the same intellect in the head, and it's a perfect example. And then you actually go to see the data where, people who transition from male to female tend to see a drop in their salary. So you have this really unique opportunity to study gender inequality with people who have the exact intellectual and human capital in the workplace. And so, to your point, it's fascinating stuff. But what we need to do as leaders is to really get beyond any of the demographics that are out there and start to look at performance and experience and what they can bring to our workplace and our uniqueness to give us that advantage.
And you said that too, like look at those things. And I think from takeaways from anybody listening to this, in my example, talking about my real estate business, I'm talking about, hey, I use a gay interior designer, or a realtor. That, you said it perfectly. There's plenty that are just as qualified and everything else. But again, in my thought process, that's what I was thinking, right? And so as leaders, being more open to understanding how to eliminate a stereotype in my own mind. Let's say, because I had such a great experience, I accomplished everything I needed to with that relationship, and how, they're my friends, but, that's where I started the basis of saying, hey, when I found the gay realtor, when I say that, am I saying that incorrectly? But now they're not known as the gay realtor that I use, or the gay interior designer I use, because we had such a great experience. I just feel that that's what is required now. And otherwise I'm beyond, the stereotype. Now I'm into qualifications. But initially, I started out and saying, "Hey, this is the area I need a gay realtor, a gay."
Absolutely. Well, so the challenge that I would pose, Chad, is, so let's think about that differently. It's the realtor who is gay versus the gay realtor, or it's my accountant who is black versus the black accountant. So what you're doing is you're putting the person first and the descriptor later, if you even have to do it at all. And that's the other thing.
Oh, that's great. No, that helps me. Like that is, for the most powerful thing you could help me with, is that right there. That just, I'm going to write that.
No,
I mean, I'm writing it as we speak, and it's going to help me.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny though, because speaking of realtor, I just did an article on understanding hidden bias for the National Association of Realtors magazine, or just a couple, like maybe about a month and a half ago. So it gives you tips on how to think about understanding hidden bias as it relates to that specific field profession. So and so all of our businesses, all of our professions have some of those opportunities where hidden bias creeps in. And so we have the opportunity as smart leaders and smart business people to start to think about, well, how is it maybe creeping in? Is it in hiring practices? Is it in, how I'm approaching clients and from a realtor perspective, or where I'm suggesting they live, and things of that nature? Really have a great opportunity for us to educate ourselves so that we can mitigate our actions and words on the biases that might be.
And you're telling me that's another reason why I got to read the book again, get it, make sure I have it. And all my listeners need to make sure they get the book, because it's going to help every single one of them with these problems that I have.
Yeah, it's if you can get through the cheeky dad humor and some of the gay jokes, you'll be fine with my book. It's for everybody, including allies. So
let's talk about, like, coming out of Pride Month. How has that month becoming bigger in the entrepreneur world, since we're just coming out of this year? Have you noticed a change?
Yeah, well, this year's a bit of an anomaly, I think, for everything that's happening in the world, including Pride. Yeah, so what you saw, at least this year, is a lot, of course, not just because of COVID-19, but a lot of Pride celebrations and different festivities were really subdued or channeled more toward people of color within the LGBTQ community, and I thought that's absolutely the right thing to do. To kind of support our Black and Brown brothers and sisters to make sure that their voice is continued to be heard. So Pride was a little bit different this year, COVID aside, and I think, and I love that, and I'm so happy about that as a collective community. We didn't get physically together and risk spreading disease, and when we did get together from a cultural perspective, it was more for the Black Lives Matter than anything else, and I think that was the cool part. But with that being said, if you look at some of the data that's out there from an entrepreneurial perspective, according to the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, and I'll use the general term, queer-owned businesses contribute $1.7 trillion to the economy.
I had no idea, but I had no idea.
That's a lot of money, and it's it's huge. And now this is the folks who are identified as LGBTQ+, and they own a business, and big or small, regardless, 1.7 trillion bucks. So that's nothing to sneeze at as far as a business community. So and you see a bigger conversation of not just those folks, but the big Fortune 500s who are really embracing what they call supplier diversity and looking for opportunities to get their work done, but by supporting minority-owned businesses, whether that be women-owned, people of color, veterans, Asian American, whatever the demographic, including LGBTQ+. And so you're seeing that shift as well. And so like I work with a lot of Fortune 500s, not just because I can deliver the goods, of course, but because I'm a gay-owned business. I'm certified, and they count that toward their, yes, certified minority. This is cool because we know we're doing not just the good thing for business, but hey, we're supporting a minority community in the same token. And so that's a smart thing to do. That's a great thing to do. It's not disenfranchising folks or saying, I don't have any of those identifications. That means I won't get business. No, there's a lot of work out there for everyone. But it's just giving that opportunity for LGBTQ folks in this case to shine a light on their opportunity that maybe has been disenfranchised in the past because of kind of the conversation that you said earlier about, I'm not comfortable with that, or this is against how I feel personally, and all those good things. So it's been an interesting shift in the time. I think you're going to see going forward that organizations and now even more municipalities, governments, we're not at the federal government part yet, but I know some local governments, including mine here in Orlando, they say, you know what? No, we include LGBT businesses as part of our minority focus on supplier diversity. And that feels really good, especially as a smaller business who now maybe might get a little bit more of a spotlight shine on them when I'm going up against some of the bigger consulting firms out there.
And right now, timing is something where you're saying you have to be. It's just advice from you and seeing businesses and cultures and work with it. You have to be changing your vision if you're not prepared for this movement. And like the LGBTQ community it's a contributor to the world, and your business has to be open to understanding that there's a new normal, right? It's changed. You have to get ready for the change and embrace change and become more open and learn. And the only way you learn is educating yourself and asking questions. Like me, I'm asking questions. We have to do that as influencers and leaders. We don't know everything. You've got to learn and educate yourself of how to pivot. Things are changing.
And it absolutely is true, Chad. And I think as smart business owners and smart business leaders, it's embracing all the others, if you will, quote unquote, all the people who are not like me. And it's not just from a personal perspective, although that's the smart thing to do, but it's also from a business perspective. What new markets can you start to break into when you start to understand a community that maybe you didn't focus your energy on, or start to peel back, or maybe didn't necessarily have visible representation within your business. Maybe you're a business that's big enough that can have employee resource groups or business resource groups, however you'd like to phrase those. Do you have those? If not, could you have those? And then how do you leverage that to make your business that much more inclusive? I know a lot of organizations I work with have employee resource groups. So they have, the women's group, the veterans group, the LGBT group, the people of color group, all the different ones. And what the smart businesses do is not just, allow that as an opportunity for demographic employees to get together, but they use them as like an internal resource to say, hey, gay folks, we're thinking about doing this to be more inclusive of your specific community. Help guide us through those conversations. And absolutely, that's a smart thing to do. So it only makes business sense for anyone listening to this to start to think about being more inclusive and more consciously inclusive in all the quote unquote others around you.
I think that some people are, as business owners that are going to be listening, like myself, let's say I want to break into the LGBTQ plus community as clients, as, if I have a product, whatever it may be, I want to get into that world, but I'm personally not LGBTQ, to learn how to bring their business into the community, into the group, and be more welcome, and understand that they can be welcomed into that community, though they are not.
Absolutely, and it's a fantastic question, and I think the first step, and this may depend on where you live, but in the age of COVID-19, there's opportunity to do a lot of cool virtual stuff if it's not within your physical ability. But and looking at the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce within your area, there's 52 throughout the U.S., mostly in major metropolitan markets, and there's so many of those. I couldn't put a number on it, but I'm going to say maybe half sometimes, depending on your chamber, that are actually just allies who want to be part of this community, who want to support this community, and not to be disingenuous, but also want to market to this community. And I know we have a ton of folks here in the Orlando, we call it the Pride Chamber here in Orlando. And a lot of them are allies who just like, hey, I want to be part of this, and I want to learn, and I want to figure out how to do that. And so I think a great opportunity for your listeners, for any group that you want to start to understand and be part of, is go in and be that ally with that specific chamber. It could be, for every LGBTQ blue chamber, there's Asian American, there's Black, there's Latino, there's just a ton. And so you just kind of do some research within your small business organizations within your local area and start to figure out, hey, when can I go to their meetings? Or now, since most of them are on Zoom or online, it's even easier if you're not physically near some. You can kind of join that chamber, drop in for their virtual hangouts and all that stuff, and get to know and network with those folks.
I could ask you so much more because I need the education, I need the learning, but
that's right.
To continue that journey and path of learning more about you and what you're teaching and how you're training people, how can the listeners follow you, stay connected to you, get more information, and learn and educate themselves? The best way to communicate and get with you.
Best way to find me for the main stuff is our main website, topdoglearning.biz, B-I-Z. We're also doing actually, and you'll see at the top of that page, we're actually giving Pride Leadership away for free. You just have to pay for shipping and handling, just because I'm trying to spread the word and get it out there. So there's that opportunity. And then, I do executive coaching as well. So if anyone wants to kind of dive deeper in these areas, happy to have a chat. You'll see on that same topdoglearning.biz, there's a form to get in touch with me or one of my top doggers, and we're happy to have a chat.
And so make sure that you guys get a copy of the book.
Chad, if I can add one really quick tiny story. So if you get the book, we just actually launched the audiobook, which that was my COVID project. There's a whole story about that. But I end up not going into a studio and doing it from home. And the best place to do that was in my master closet. So I read my gay leadership book in the closet. So there's kind of that.
That's kind of funny. If I was, if I say, hey, you were in the closet reading your book, that's kind of funny for me. I would be like, so Yeah, I'd see, and I don't even know how to joke. I don't even know how to say my right jokes or anything. Man, I got to get off this, podcast. I'm gonna have to be like, oh my gosh, I had the most odd things. I usually am talk, I talk so much, and I know everything to say. This is the first time that I'm running out of stuff to say the right way, and I'm second guessing everything I'm saying, Dr. Steve.
You're doing great.
But you're helping me so much, and listeners too. I really, really appreciate your time. But before I let you go, I've got to ask you my top 3 questions. Are you ready?
Yes, go.
All right. First thing, if you were to look down at your phone, what's the first song that's going to be playing on your playlist?
Oh, I think it was because I did it my workout this morning. I think that it left off at what's his name? I'll just make this up because I know it's on the same playlist. It's a Vangelis song, if you remember Vangelis back in like the 80s. So
next one is, what's your favorite movie?
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh man, a classic. All right, good. Ferris Bueller. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Last one is, what is your pet's name?
Thanks for asking. I have 2 canine children. I have Ella and I have Russell.
Ella and Russell. Okay, what kind of dogs are Ella and Russell?
They are, because just to perpetuate the gay stereotype, they are mini Labradoodles. So actually, I'm allergic to dogs, so we had hypoallergenic stuff. They're pretty cool. They're our kids.
Dr. Steve, man, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your education, what you're doing. Your message is no more. It's more important now than ever. I think people have to open their eyes to the world, to change, embrace change. We're going to have even more changes after 2020. The world is moving, and you're an example of that, and showing it and teaching it, educating it. And I just really appreciate your time you spent with us today.
Thank you, Chad. And thanks for all you do for us small business folks out there. We appreciate the voice.
Okay, thank you so much. Don't forget, Steve, you're always on call.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, friends, you are always on call.